Hello and welcome to part 2 of describing common endpoint attacks. Now, the idea here of redirecting a user, that user could be redirected to many different kinds of services. Web-based attacks are going to be among the most common ones. Now be careful. You've seen me do this before. A lot of times we talk about these kinds of attacks or techniques or procedures from one direction. Other times we talk about them from two different directions. Now, the whole reason why I'm bringing that up is this is an example from two different directions. For example, it could be web-based attacks where the user is having their client side, so their web-based application or web-based client that is going to be compromised, maybe because of the actual resource they're trying to access, the universal resource locator. But at the same time, we could have the web server itself also be compromised. So the server hosting the application be compromised and have files uploaded that are running various scripts that can then be used to infect new users coming to this site. For example, XSS, or what is more specifically known as cross-site scripting, is a very common mechanism for vulnerable web servers and web applications that take advantage of the file upload vulnerabilities. Now, let me pause just for 1 second, give you a chance to breathe, because if you were like me, when I was first learning these back in the day, I thought to myself, my goodness, it seems like you're saying a lot of if and then and next. Well, how do I put all this stuff together? I don't know enough to go out and get this application and know this OS vulnerability and know that application deficiency. Well, folks, what really makes a lot of this stuff very scary is there are unfortunately groups that have done that for the attackers already. And those tools, those documented steps, those applications that come together and form a framework for the attackers to use to almost in an automated manner launch an attack against an unsuspected destination. These exploit kits are out there. They've been out there for a long, long time. Typically using a PHP-based script. My goodness, folks, PHP has been around for a very long time, a very popular programming language for web development. I mean, I'm talking since the early 90s. And they're able to use these exploit kits. Once again, the framework is my favorite word to describe what an exploit kit is, to help hold the attacker's hand to launch attacks to quickly take advantage of exploits. So that would be, again, to discover the systems, discover the operating systems, discover the services, discover the vulnerabilities, and then take advantage of those vulnerabilities. Now, remember, again, I was trying to kind of tell a story along the way. The scenario here is we've used, for example, an exploit kit to take advantage of a known vulnerability in a remote system. That known vulnerability maybe gives us command line access, and then we're able to copy files to this exploited system. Well, folks, that's where your rootkits come into play. And rootkits, my goodness, they are especially nasty. Rootkits give the attacker the ability to not only load malicious files, but then hide them as maybe, for example, operating system files. Files that are part of, even named as part of the core operating system. So unless you're doing analysis of the individual files, you're not even going to be able to, or your security software is not even going to be able to identify that the rootkit has been installed. Folks, I still remember the days when rootkits first came out and all we were doing was passive antivirus scans, not even bothering to look at the operating system files or loading the antivirus software as part of a kernel module. And my goodness, these rootkits were just blowing right past all of our security software. Now, thankfully, again, you have security software, security suites that have the ability to identify these today, but they still are around and they still can pose a pretty serious problem. So here is that scenario. Again, we have found an in system that is publicly accessible. We've identified ports and services. We've identified that a service is actually vulnerable, and we were able to take advantage of that vulnerability. Now, let me pause for a second. I promise I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not going to mention any application names because that would hurt some people's feelings. But I remember, again, being an almost career-long Cisco person, having to do a lot of TFTP transfers, my TFTP app of choice back in the day was actually susceptible. We later found out that it was susceptible to a buffer overflow style of an attack. And as I mentioned earlier, you might remember from the very beginning of this overview, some of these applications that were susceptible to buffer overflow style attacks, maybe when they were compromised, they just stopped or they locked up. Well, unfortunately, this TFTP application gave command line access to the attacking system. Horrible. And then what we were able to do is, for example, connect in Telnet or SSH in, and then once we gained access to the command line, do what is referred to as a privilege escalation. For example, we would be able to access the command line of the vulnerable server using the account that was set up in the application. So what we could do is maybe log in as a TFTP admin once we gained command line access, and then do a privilege escalation to an administrator or a root account that had higher privileges, again referred to as a privilege escalation. All right, so here's where we are. Again, trying to build a story for you. We've found an available system, an accessible system, over a known service, a service that has known vulnerabilities, and we were able to take advantage, exploit that vulnerability, and then once again gain command line access. Well, one way of doing a exploitation after you've gained access is at the command line using PowerShell. I want to stress PowerShell has been around for many, many years. I still remember first seeing it in '98, and I use it a lot today for my direct programmability into a device's APIs. But the problem with PowerShell, and it's nothing built into PowerShell itself, it's just like many applications. They can be used for benign, good, or they can be used for malicious, evil. So here's an example of a system that has been compromised. We gain access to the command line and then execute PowerShell, which is its own command line on the end system. And they're actually showing you here an actual utility, Mimikatz, that was dedicated to, at the command line, grabbing any caches of previously entered password hashes. So please note, first off, we see that we're running the Mimikatz command, and we can see the various login accounts, and then also their hash of a previously used password. Well, folks, what Mimikatz then would do is it would have a database of password hashes, and it would literally do what is referred to as a simple dictionary style of a lookup. And that is, I don't know what your password is, but hey, I happen to have an entry in my database, in my dictionary, of that exact same hash output. So I'm going to do a reverse lookup. That's again why we refer to it as a dictionary style attack. I'm going to do a reverse lookup, and I see that based upon that hash of a previously entered password, your password must be super secret password. And it was scary how effective this kind of a application and applications like it were. All right, remember again, we're going over tools, techniques, processes, procedures. I mentioned earlier the concept of an exploit kit, and that is, my goodness, these are a lot of different steps. I do this step and then I do that step, and I forgot what application to use. Don't worry about it. A lot of these exploit kits would have the applications for you and have the steps clearly defined and available for you to use. Angler is one of many exploit kits that happens to be focusing on web-based sites and web-based content. So multimedia content style applications, which by the way has been yet another big push over to HTML5. So again, Angler would commonly be used in plain HTML sites, Java, JavaScript, Flash, Silverlight. So again, multimedia-based applications, based websites, and taking advantage of those known vulnerabilities. Folks, finishing up here with a crypto wall. This is actually what's referred to as a crypto wall decrypt message or crypto wall decrypt instructions. Crypto wall happens to be one of many examples, and especially vicious examples, of ransomware, where when the attacker was able to successfully access your system through public accessibility, known services and vulnerabilities in those services, and then gain access to your file system. They would encrypt your file system and then maybe send you an email, redirect you to a website. This could be a pop-up when you first access your system, letting you know that, hey, your file system has been encrypted, and if you want the data back, you got to pay us money. So that's where the concept of ransomware comes into play. And then they start giving you threats of, if you don't give us this money by this time, then the cost to get your data back is going to go up maybe by a factor, for example, 2 times, they're telling you. And some of the ways that the attackers would get around some of the laws or international laws around this kind of an attack is saying, oh, no, we're giving you access to your data freely. We just want you to go in and buy this application that will decrypt your data. And here, by the way, is the way you can go through and make your payment for the application. I'm going to stop there because there's so much more around this. For example, finding yourself a security suite that specifically has protection against ransomware. Not just protection, but steps to help you remediate in the event your system gets compromised.